The following program has been pre-recorded, so please don't call in at this time. If you wish to participate in the program, tune in at 5 p.m. every Wednesday for A Pause for Thought on Baton Rouge Community Radio. Good evening, fellow humans. This is Wayne Parker with A Pause for Thought on Baton Rouge Community Radio, 96.9 FM in Baton Rouge. This is a live call-in show. Feel free to call in and share your thoughts and questions on the topic of the evening. The only rules are you are be respectful and voice your views as opinions. Okay, we have a guest for tonight who is a candidate for Metro Council District 12, Scott Cornelius. Scott Cornelius is his name, and his website is electscottcornelius.com, correct?
That is right, yes.
So, thank you for coming, Scott.
Absolutely, yeah.
And Kendall Losey is here, co-hosting.
Hello.
And thank you, Kendall. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Scott, before we get into what I had planned on asking you last week,
Right.
What do you think of the flooding?
Well, you know, we obviously all of our thoughts and prayers are with everyone who has been negatively impacted by the flooding over the past weekend, and I think a lot of people, however, are really looking forward to talking about and hearing about something other than the flooding, and so I think I do think that it's right for us to push forward with what we've planned for the evening.
Yeah, okay. I kind of felt that way, too. I was on the Mississippi Gulf Coast after Katrina, and the local networks were just putting out blather, and of course, hopefully, we don't do that, but it was true. People were just, they didn't have power, they didn't have
Right.
communications, all they had was their transistor radios, and so they were glad to hear something.
And in this case, a lot of people had the TVs going as well, because most of us didn't lose power, and a lot of people had the local news on, and I think a lot of people found that it became almost a very voyeuristic thing while we were watching all of this going on,
About drama and
Yeah.
filling the time.
Absolutely, yeah.
They could have, filled it with going to shelters and,
Yeah.
calling for help and things. I know, I saw the same thing, but that's the nature of the business. Kendall?
I'd like to add, though, I found it very informative for some of us who did lose power where we were. It was helpful because having it on the radio was very helpful to know what's going on around us, and maybe, hey, when are we going to be able to get out of here? And
Yeah, that's good stuff. That's important.
Sure, yeah.
right?
When it's informative, that's great. But I think particularly the TV coverage. I didn't listen to much from the radio coverage, but the TV coverage, I think a lot of it. Not a lot of it, but at certain times it got a little voyeuristic there. Of watching all these people in trouble and not, and nothing else.
Yeah, watching the emotions and all
Right, yeah.
all that stuff. Yeah, typical American media, really. But
Right.
yeah, and I do want to say, speaking of flood coverage, our own Brian Marks here with WHYR has been doing live coverage and updates and everything with the flooding. And I told him tonight that he's free to feel free to call in with any updates if he has them. So he may be interrupting if there's something important. I don't think he'll be calling in to play the latest 911 recording or anything. But
Yeah.
Anyway, okay, Scott Cornelius, Metro Council District 12 candidate. Tell us about yourself. Are you originally from Baton Rouge?
Yeah, well, I was born in Houston, but
Okay.
moved here when I was 2, so I certainly say I'm from here, even
That
if I
counts,
wasn't.
yeah.
Right, yeah, not technically born here, but whatever. And, I went to McKinley High. A lot of people ask me that for some reason, where I went to high school when I'm out canvassing. I'm not really sure what they're looking for, but yeah, I went to McKinley High, went to LSU, graduated with a degree in geography. And while I was there, I really focused a lot on urban geography and transportation geography in my coursework, even though that we don't have a separate degree for that or
Right.
concentration or anything. But I focused on that, and and working with CATS now, the bus system.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that in a little while, but
Sure.
Did you just have an interest in geography? That's
Well, the way I got there was I've always played around with, well, I shouldn't say always played around with, well, really, from the time I was probably a freshman in high school, I became interested in why there was so much traffic. Why, why it's such a huge problem in Baton Rouge, because it's, for most of the time I've been paying attention, then it's been the biggest topic on people's minds politically and otherwise around Baton Rouge. And so I started trying to explore it and learn more about it. And it took a while for me to really figure out what I could do with that in college.
Yeah.
But eventually I decided I was looking at urban planning, and I decided or found that a common undergrad degree for that was geography. And so that's kind of how I got there. And I've always kind of, since then, been playing around with what I would do to address it if I could.
Yeah.
And it's my ideas have been informed and refined over time, obviously. But,
well, good. No, that shows maturity and thoughtfulness and everything. And I do want to tell the listeners right now, if you want to call in, and of course you're welcome to do so, you can just call 343-9927, 343-9927, and we're talking with Scott Cornelius, who is a candidate for the Metro Council in District 12. Scott, it sounds like, by what you're saying here, that you're one of those rarities that's trying to make a positive difference in the community.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, people, the most common question I get is why you're running.
Yes, that's what was going to the next question,
okay,
actually.
well, yeah, go ahead, move on to it.
Well, no, go ahead.
But, initially I said, well, I want to make a difference. I feel like I have been trying to make a difference with cats.
Yes.
And I found, and I figured that it would be better, that I would be able to better help the community and better improve the community on the Metro Council. But that's not been the thing that people wanted to hear, It's then I started getting into policy positions, and that's not what they wanted to hear either. And I after the conventions, I really realized that the thing that I had, the thought process I'd gone through, that people were looking for, was the team politics. That's the thing that I'm really kind of running against, is because I'm a no-party candidate, I'm an independent, and I found, particularly during the conventions, the party conventions, that that politics has really become this sort of team sport, where what matters is winning and rooting for the winning team, and that's great in team sports because all that's at stake is entertainment,
right,
and winning. It's just, the problem is that in politics we added the nuclear codes,
Yes. Well, I mean, you say you're against the team concept or whatever,
right.
Team politics, but I mean, when you win, you'll still be a team player with the council, though, right? I mean,
that's when I say team politics, I mean in terms of a team sport where you have side A and side B, and they are competing.
Right, and anybody on our side, on our team, you got to support whether he's a jerk or not. Right.
That's right. Yeah, and it's all about cheering for your team to victory.
Yep.
But when I'm on the council, I don't want to be looking at it as two different teams. It should be one group trying to reach decisions, reaching a consensus, and compromising where necessary to make that happen.
Right, and you're definitely going to be an outsider, I guess, just by your relative youth. I guess you're
Sure.
probably late 20s or so. Or?
Yeah, sure.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, yeah. Sorry, that was probably rude of me to ask that, but anyway, you mentioned several times your experience with cats.
Yes.
Let's just jump ahead with that. I have other
All right.
questions on the issue of traffic congestion,
Sure.
which you have a lot to say about on
Absolutely.
your website, electscottcornelius.com. But tell us about your experience with cats.
Well, I've been a planner there, been in the planning department, and my job is to evaluate the service and figure out what we can do to improve the regular fixed route service that we offer. And that was part of the motivation for running for office, was that I found, not only for myself but for others, that oftentimes good ideas were getting derailed by politics.
Mm-hmm.
And I decided that I instead of just proposing ideas, that I would be the politics. So that's
Be the politics. What do you mean?
well, that instead of trying to work within CATS as an organization, I would instead from the Metro Council, I would then be on the
I understand.
political side.
Yes, and I understand. Yeah, and if you're out there on the council and you speak your views and they make sense to people, they're all going to look at the rest of the people at CATS and say, or whatever organization, and say,
Sure.
why aren't you considering this?
Yeah, and I should point out that the good ideas I'm talking about aren't necessarily critical of CATS.
Oh, yeah, I understand. I gave that
right.
impression, I know. Sorry.
But they are, I think, positive for CATS and for the community that
Right.
we serve, and I think that in politics that is the better way for me to give voice to those ideas.
Yeah, kind of the bully pulpit, I suppose.
To an extent, sure, yeah.
I mean, you're out there; they can't constrain you. Once you get a microphone in front of you, you can
Right,
say
yeah.
what you think, and that could be very powerful. Yeah, but okay, the planning for CATS. You plan the routes, or
Yeah, I mean,
and
we
you plan what size buses are to use.
well, not so much with the size buses. Mostly just the routes where they go, how often they run, that kind of thing. The
Okay.
details of the service, what buses are used. That's more of a day-to-day determination by operations and things. So
Oh, okay. Well, we don't want to
Yeah.
get bogged down in the details
yeah.
of that. Although it would be interesting to me to know about that because,
off air, yeah, I'll go into that.
Okay, yeah, well, CATS is, public transportation is very important.
Yes.
And getting back to all that,
Yes.
you say on your website that you want to scrap the existing Euclidean zoning system in favor of
Yes.
a new form-based code. Okay, what's Euclidean zoning
Okay.
system?
Euclidean zoning, which is named after the court case, Euclid, Ohio, was.
Oh, I thought it was
Yeah.
named
No,
after
it's-
Euclidean
No.
algebra or geometry or whatever. Yeah, but anyway.
No, the town of Euclid, Ohio, was
Okay.
the first to
Cool.
to take it to court anyway,
Mhm.
and it's also known as single-use zoning. So, what Euclidean zoning or single-use zoning does, it regulates the use of a property. So we divide up the whole parish into different zones, and those zones determine how you can use your property. The difference with a form-based code is we don't regulate the use, we regulate the form. So you can do whatever you want with the property so long as you develop it in the way set forth in the code. So it is much more effective at controlling the development pattern. It's also generally, and certainly compared to our current code, would be much easier to comply with and for us to enforce because the current code is a mess. Frank Duke, as the head of the City Parish Planning Commission, has done a great job of gradually going through and trying to improve it. But I think even he would agree that we need to that it would be better for us to scrap it and get something new in here.
Interesting. What got it to this point? Do you have any idea?
It's just sort of, I mean,
Like probably Band-Aids over the years.
yeah.
and
I
little
mean,
quick
from what I
fixes,
understand, we haven't really we haven't had an all new one in several decades, and it has been amended and amended and amended over the years, and it's just gotten ridiculous. And they have cleaned it up a bit. They have chapter by chapter. They've been going through and cleaning it up. Like I said, Frank Duke's been leading that process and has done a great job with it. But like I said, I think even he would agree that we need to. It'd be much better to just all at once rewrite it.
But how? Okay, so they would allow. I mean, that would require a lot of rebuilding or redesigning of buildings, wouldn't it?
Well, no, because the zoning code only applies to depending on which kind you have when you're making a change. So the zoning code doesn't say, or depending on how you word the regulations, then it's not going to make well you're out of code, so you have to change all of these various things. It only applies when you're making a change to the property, when it's
I see. When it changes hands or whatever.
when it changes hands, or when you're redeveloping it or developing a new property, that kind of thing.
Okay, so it'd be a gradual thing. And see, I'm
Yeah,
showing
absolutely.
my own civics ignorance, but
Right,
that's
yeah.
okay.
It would have a fairly quick impact on new development.
Sure.
But its overall impact would be much more long term as properties are redeveloped and changed over time.
Has anybody else, or have you proposed this publicly, and have you been able to gauge how much cooperation you get, or?
Well, zoning is one of those things that's really kind of dense, and people don't really like to.
And boring.
Yeah,
yes.
it's kind of boring. Yeah, and so it hasn't gotten a lot of public traction, but yeah, I think a lot of the people who are involved with it on a day-to-day basis understand that it is, and I have heard several politicians say that it is just The current code is just a mess.
Well, that's encouraging. That's what I meant, actually, is
Yeah.
getting cooperation from people you're going to need to get cooperation with.
Right.
so-
Yeah. It's there's certainly an acknowledgement that the current one is a mess, but how to fix it, I think, is a little bit more contentious.
Sure.
But not. But once again, it's dense and boring, so people, there's not a lot of enmity to it.
Yes. Okay. I want to remind our listeners again that we're talking with Scott Cornelius, candidate for Metro Council District 12. You can feel free to call in and ask him some questions. 343-9927, 343-9927. Scott, one of your other ideas for traffic or alleviating traffic congestion in Baton Rouge is demand management.
Yeah.
And that seemed interesting. You want to talk about that?
Well, demand management is a very broad term, encompassing a lot of different strategies for, and it can all be summed up as efforts to get cars that just an individual person is using to get to work, to and from work, getting people out of those cars and into some other form of transportation, so that we can get cars off of the roads, and that's really the only way to reduce traffic congestion, is to deal with not just the supply of transportation capacity, but the demand as well. There's three main categories. Well, I like to break them into three categories anyway. You've got regulations, which is like the zoning code that I was describing. Then you've got the carrots and the stick. So you've got the carrots are public investments, like better bus system, better bicycle infrastructure, really any kind of infrastructure upgrades. And there's a few other kinds of things that are incentives for people to get out of their cars and take other modes of transportation. And then you got the stick, which is road pricing or other kinds of restricted access.
Like tolls and things like that?
Tolls are one form of road pricing, yeah. And so those are sometimes unpleasant, and that's why they're the stick. But they have the benefit of, first of all, not costing anything, whereas the carrots always cost substantially.
Right.
And they also have the benefit of being more effective generally, because it takes years and years for infrastructure upgrades to be built, whereas we can, in a pretty short amount of time, implement the sort of the stick measures that we're
Right.
talking about. But remember, I'm not proposing any particular combination of these.
Right. You just need ideas. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I think we just need to get somebody up there who knows and understands this kind of thing, and then we should evaluate those. And a lot of this would have to be approved by the voters anyway.
Right. Yeah, but it sounds to me as though we could use someone with fresh ideas.
Yes.
To at least break up the log jam and the monotony and everything else. But Kendall,
I agree.
Look like your wheels are turning there.
Yeah, I was going to ask Scott, what major things would you like to see happen to alleviate traffic in Baton Rouge?
Well, I don't have, like I said, I don't have any particular recommendations at this point. Even though I've had a lot of ideas over the years, and I still have plenty, the thing I really need in order to put together that kind of a proposal would be the sort of the institutional resources that I would get from being on the council. So what I'm trying to do is just point out the breadth of options that are out there that we need to consider, and then I think we need someone on the council who is willing to consider all those options and put them to the voters, even where it might be, I was mentioning the stick things, those kinds of things. They might be politically unpopular, but we need someone who's willing to put that to the voters, and if they reject it, they reject it,
Yeah, and of course well, I won't go into that opinion because that's my opinion, and this show is yours. But anyway, I mentioned that you're running for District 12.
Yes.
Where exactly is District 12 generally?
Well, it includes the area sort of south of LSU and north of Brightside Lane, and then most of it runs between Perkins Road and Highland Road. That's so Kenilworth, South Downs.
Right. Okay.
All of that is in there. So yeah, it's mostly in South Baton Rouge.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, let's see here. You also talk about crime a bit, and we talked a little bit about community policing.
Yes.
Before the show. And on your website, electscottcornelius.com, you say that we should imitate or learn from, I think is what you say, the Gardere Community Policing Program.
Yes, the sheriff's office has already deployed a community policing program which has been very successful, not just for building those important community ties and getting that buy-in from the community to really and building trust with the officers, but it's also reduced crime quite a lot, and that's the thing that I think really makes it go from the point where community policing, it shouldn't be this vague strategy that we're proposing to deal with the various issues that come up. It really should just be the way policing is done, because it's effective,
And by community policing, you mean just having those deputies that patrol living in East Baton Rouge Parish, right?
Well, no, that's far from what community policing is. Really, what community policing is where you have officers engaging with the people in that community. They don't have to live there to do that. It can help a bit. So incentives, that kind of thing would be fine, but requiring them to live there is certainly not necessary for community policing.
As I understand it, actually, the trick to the beauty of community policing is that they spend a lot of time in a particular community.
Yes,
so they get to know the people get to know them, and
right.
They see each other as human beings, and it's different.
Yeah, and they can get on a name basis with each other.
Right, sure, and they know the quirks and habits of the different people and all
right,
that. So, yeah. And you say that the Baton Rouge Sheriff's Office is already doing this?
Yeah, they're already doing this in Gardere, which is outside the city limits of Baton Rouge, so it's the sheriff's office responsibility. And they deployed a couple of extra officers because you have to have enough officers to run your regular patrols and then have others engaging the community, and you rotate them out a bit. Right. So you do need more officers in order to do that. And that's, from what I understand, been the main impediment to deploying that kind of a strategy in the city of Baton Rouge. Is the BRPD just doesn't have enough officers.
Yeah, well, but probably in the long run, and we hardly ever are able to think of the long run, but it would reduce costs simply by reducing the number of citizens killed and arrested and incarcerated, and police that are injured, too.
Perhaps, yeah, that could be a benefit from it.
Well, I'm thinking if you're reducing crime, you're reducing the risks of all those things, so...
Yeah, I still think the main costs are how many officers you got out there, but if we're going to be investing in anything, I think that should certainly be, if not at, but very near the top of the list.
Yeah, well, I mean, where I grew up as a child, of course, I'm getting up there now, but we had community policing, and the police would come to the schools and talk to the kids and explain their jobs and whatnot, and, it was a friendly thing. You also mentioned you want to merge the BRPD, the Baton Rouge Police Department, with the Sheriff's Office?
Yes, it was discussed a few years back and studied, and nothing's come of it since. But it would save millions of dollars a year in, perhaps tens of millions of dollars, in the administration, which is parallel and kind of redundant between the two. And those savings could then be reinvested in hiring those additional officers. Maybe because one of the problems with recruitment, I understand, has been that BRPD doesn't pay particularly well for a starting salary, so you could increase salaries with it. I mean, with the amount of money you'd save by doing that, then we might even be able to afford the community policing efforts.
Yeah, okay. Sticking with the general neighborhood, I guess,
sure.
Gardere and the other areas, that are of concern and need attention. What about, have you given any thought to an emergency room or something, or even a hospital in the northern part of the city?
I think the main thing we need to do to address healthcare in North Baton Rouge, or in the middle of the city, depending on how you look at it, is, I really like the proposal put forth by Together Baton Rouge a few months ago to create a healthcare district, or technically a hospital district, and that district would have very broad authority to investigate those various options and to potentially line up funding, although any funding source that they required from the people, whether it be taxes or bonds or things like that, those would have to be approved by the voters. So it doesn't cost anything, but it really positions us well to investigate those various possibilities and to put them into action.
Okay, so this would be like an independent group or whatever? I mean, because, when people say we're doing a study, we all just kind of throw up our
Right,
hands and figure it's going to get lost.
Yeah. Well, it's a board which would be appointed by the Metro Council. So the Metro Council could theoretically appoint a board that just studies things and doesn't actually do anything, but certainly the hope would be that we would create it and then we would fill it with people anxious to solve the problems.
And with you there, you'd crack the whip on it, right? Make sure that
yes,
it's got it done.
absolutely.
Yeah, okay. Let's see here. You mentioned the flooding. We talked about the flooding initially here. Have you thought about, is there anything with our geography or with our zoning that could have mitigated the consequences?
Not really, unfortunately. I mean, it was a 500-year flood event, from what I understand, which is just such an unlikely thing to occur.
Right.
Because remember, 500-year doesn't mean that it should occur once every 500 years. It's a 0.2% chance of occurring in any one given year.
Right.
So it's so unlikely to happen that we can't prepare for every eventuality, and so no, there really wasn't much we could have done to prepare for it. You could maybe criticize some of the response efforts, but I think it's too early to really get into that.
Yeah, and that wouldn't be really appropriate anyway. We don't have this sort of thing happen that often, so
Sure.
there are going to be mistakes, and other people are going to have to learn.
Yeah.
It's not everywhere. They don't have a long history of, of how these things have been dealt with in the past. Because
I suppose. I mean, at the state level, they have to respond to hurricanes. So
Well, true,
there
yeah.
should be a level of preparedness to respond to various events. But like I said, it's too early to get into details with this
right.
event.
Yeah, and to me, we're too busy still recovering from it.
Yeah.
You're listening to a Pause for Thought on Baton Rouge Community Radio. You feel free to call in at 343-9927, 343-9927. We're talking with Scott Cornelius, candidate for Metro Council District 12. We have about 3 minutes left in the show. You also have a position on the Fairness Ordinance or something similar to that here in Baton Rouge?
Yes. If you don't remember, that was discussed a couple of years back. It was a non-discrimination ordinance, which would cover, in addition to what is already in state and federal law, sexual orientation, gender identity, and veteran status. And it would cover that for employment, for housing, and for public accommodations. So that was discussed a few years back, and it was rejected by the council. And I would be strongly in favor of passing and proposing such an ordinance.
Well, I personally am glad to hear that because I have a lot of gay friends, and it's just something that should be done, in my opinion, and it's the way people should be, behaving toward each other.
And of course, you might, whether you would accuse me or be encouraged by the fact that I have somewhat of a vested interest in it, then there is that. I can't hide from that. Being a member of the LGBT community. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, but that's fine. But everyone should be concerned. Everybody should want
Absolutely.
that sort of thing, in my opinion. Okay, well, we have a couple minutes left, Scott, and I wanted to say again, your website is electscottcornelius.com, correct?
That's right. Yes,
Okay.
and you can go there and you can contact me. You can also donate there if you feel so inclined, and you can learn more about me and my positions.
Cool. Okay. Well, and speaking of positions, I'm looking here at one page of your website
Sure.
for economic development. What can you say about that? I mean, you just mean going to give tax incentives to businesses?
Oh no, that's really the problem that we get into is politicians in particular, really they hear economic development or they think about it, and really what they think is tax incentives, and that's really completely backwards because employers are looking for a couple of things to get locations on their radar, to get them on a short list, and then they consider tax incentives.
Get them on the radar with businesses.
Right, yeah.
Trying to get
The
businesses to want to come here
Right.
instead of trying to entice them.
Right, businesses compile a short list, and then it's when they go to the tax incentives. We need to get on the short list more often. That's the main thing we need to do. And what they're looking for inputs. They're looking for an educated workforce and infrastructure. We can't really change the inputs. That's much oil and gas. That's that kind of thing. Water. We have all that.
Right.
What we need to invest in is the education, so that we have a qualified workforce and the infrastructure so that they can, get their products out to consumers, so that they can get the inputs into whatever they're doing, and that's how we get on more shortlists.
Okay, sure. And taking care of education would get a lot of people on board with your candidacy, I'm sure.
Of course, I have to point out that K through 12 is pretty much exclusively the authority of the school board, and that's not what I'm running for. But,
right. Okay.
But for adult education and some also for early education, those things can be addressed by the Metro Council.
Right. Plus, you still have the bully pulpit you could use, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. We've been talking with Scott Cornelius, candidate for Metro Council, Baton Rouge Metro Council, District 12. This is Wayne Parker and Kendall Losey on A Pause for Thought, WHYR 96.9 FM here in Baton Rouge. We thank you for listening, and Scott, we'll have you back. Thank you.
Looking forward to it. Thanks.